Hello and welcome to Starbound's second channel. My name is Gabriel the Bibi Capaldi and I'll be your narrator today. But before we get into today's story, please do check down below that you are subscribed to the channel. It's 100% free and helps us pop up on your feed a bit more often.
The alien planet below us is a strange anomaly. Believe it or not, it's the only planet we've ever found where symbiotic ties are not the primary driving force for evolution,
Zira said, standing in front of the new ambassador as he sat in close to the small holographic display in the center of the room. Zira added,
Earth doesn't raise prey, it breeds predators.
Zira's gaze remained fixed on the new ambassador, Kronix, searching for any hint of a reaction. The Trodir diplomat sat perfectly still, his white, rigid skin absorbing some of the ambient light of the viewing deck. Kronix's form was typical of most spacefaring species, bipedal, with the expected symmetry of limbs and sensory apparatus. His hands rested on his lap, motionless. Two yellow eyes, large and unblinking, stared at the holographic display of the blue-green planet below. Most distinctive were the pair of slender antennae protruding from his skull, currently held rigid in what Zira assumed was concentration. After several moments of observing, Zira noticed only a slight, almost imperceptible movement in Kronix's right antenna. Was it confusion? Disbelief? Concern? Impossible to tell. Zira exhaled slowly, abandoning his pointless attempt to read emotional cues across species boundaries. Even after centuries of interspecies diplomacy, the subtle language of human bodies remained largely indecipherable. Interpreting the movements of these antennae was like trying to read meaning in the pattern of stellar dust, possible in theory, but beyond his current ability. Giving up on his analysis, Zira turned his attention to the rest of the room while Kronix processed what he had just been told about Earth. The place they showed as standard initiation ritual for new species joining the Council. The viewing deck of their diplomatic vessel was minimalist by any species standards. Black metallic walls surrounded them, seamless and unadorned, designed to be inoffensive to any cultural aesthetic. A single viewport dominated one wall, framing the planet Earth against the void of space. The room contained no furniture whatsoever, except for the two chairs they occupied and the small holographic display between them, showing detailed scans of the planet's surface and atmospheric conditions. The lighting was perhaps the most curious feature. It emanated from everywhere, eliminating all shadows in a way that made depth perception slightly challenging, even for Zira's well-adapted eyes. He looked back toward Kronix, who remained silent and unreadable. In contrast to the Trodir ambassador, whose emotions presumably broadcast through his antenna in a language Zira couldn't comprehend. Zira's own species was known for their expressive facial contortions. His green skin stretched over a face featuring high, prominent ridges above deep-set purple eyes. His mouth was wide and flexible, capable of conveying dozens of distinct emotional states through subtle shifts in position. His jaw was lined with a series of small respiratory gill-like structures and expanded and contracted with his emotional state. The crest that ran from the top of his skull down his back shone with a subtle bioluminescence that changed color with his mood, currently a neutral blue-green that indicated attention. His long, slender fingers were constantly in motion, another unconscious emotional indicator his species relied upon. Now, he deliberately stilled them, not wanting to broadcast his growing impatience to a being who probably couldn't interpret the gesture anyway. "This initiation ritual," Kronix finally spoke, his voice carrying the resonance characteristic of translated speech. "I find it difficult to believe such a practice exists. Why have I been brought to observe this weird planet specifically? And how long has the Council been watching this place for such a ritual to exist at all?" Satisfied that Kronix had developed enough acceptance to begin asking questions, Zira walked back to the center of the room and finally took a seat opposite the ambassador. The chair adjusted to his physiology, providing support where his species required it.
The Council has been aware of Earth for millions of years,
Zira explained, watching as the holographic display shifted to show the planet in various stages of its development.
even before it had its name changed because the first species that evolved intelligence there decided to start calling their odd planetary soil Earth.
Kronix's antennae shot upward in what Zira interpreted as shock. Millions of years? I understand the Council is ancient, but millions of years of observation of a single world seems excessive. Zira's mouth shifted into what his species would recognize as an expression of amusement.
Millions of years is nothing on a cosmic scale, Ambassador. Similar councils have existed many times before ours. There were ancient spacefaring species that evolved much sooner than either of our civilizations, and there are preserved records showing that Earth was known to be a deadly and odd place for billions of years already. Even the ancient bacteria there were deadly by the standards of most worlds. This has always been the home of predators, perhaps from the moment life began.
Kronix's antennae slowly curved forward. I still don't understand the difference. It's normal for every planet to have some predators here and there. Why is this place special? And if it's such a hellish world as you suggest, why has it been observed for so long and left undisturbed? Zira leaned forward, activating a new sequence on the holographic display. The image shifted, showing microscopic images of primitive cellular structures moving through ancient seas.
To understand, we must begin at the beginning,
Zira said.
4 billion years ago, when life first emerged on Earth, it was already different from what we see on most worlds.
The display zoomed in on primitive microorganisms, showing their internal structures in intricate detail. The ancient cells exuded a primal vitality, their membranes shifting and undulating as they moved through the primordial soup.
On most worlds,
Zira continued,
early life forms establish symbiotic relationships almost immediately. Entities share resources, exchange beneficial compounds, and form colonies that work together to survive environmental challenges. This cooperation becomes the foundation of all subsequent evolutionary paths.
The display split to show a comparison between Earth's early life and that from more typical worlds. On one side, Earth's primitive organisms moved aggressively toward one another. On the other, similar organisms from another world clustered together in harmonious groups.
But on Earth, from the very first moments, competition was the rule. These early life forms didn't just live alongside each other, they consumed one another. They developed toxins specifically designed to kill competing organisms. They stole genetic material from their victims. The very first cellular membranes were designed not just to contain, but to exclude and protect.
The display focused on one particularly aggressive Earth microbe, which extended pseudopods to envelop a smaller organism, absorbing its nutrients and leaving nothing behind.
The earliest life forms on Earth developed mechanisms specifically for killing and consuming others,
Zira explained.
They evolved enzymes that could break down the cell walls of their neighbors. They produced chemicals that would disrupt the metabolic processes of competitors. Some even developed primitive forms of locomotion solely to better hunt their prey.
Kronix leaned closer to the display. But surely this is just an early stage variation. All worlds have some competitive pressure.
Not like this,
Zira said firmly.
The council equivalent of that era debated intensely about this anomaly. Some argued that the planet should be sterilized immediately. as such a competitive system could never produce the cooperative behaviors necessary for complex life. The debate continued for millions of years, with regular monitoring of this strange experiment in evolution.
The display shifted to show the ancient oceans of Earth, teeming with microscopic life.
What made Earth truly unusual,
Zira continued,
was the intensity of its selection pressures. The planet underwent extreme climate fluctuations, bombardment from space, massive volcanic eruptions, and rapid chemical changes in its oceans and atmosphere. In most worlds, such conditions led to the development of cooperative strategies to weather these challenges collectively.
The display showed a simulation of massive volcanic eruptions, changing the chemistry of the ancient oceans, followed by the emergence of new forms of life adapted to these conditions.
But on Earth, these catastrophes didn't eliminate competition. They intensified it. With each disaster, the survivors were those better equipped, not just to endure the changing conditions, but to outcompete others for the remaining resources. The pattern was always the same: crisis, competition, adaptation, and emergence of even more effective predatory strategies.
The display shifted again, showing the gradual emergence of more complex single-celled organisms.
The Council was fascinated by how Earth's life found ways to become more complex despite the lack of cooperation. Instead of forming symbiotic colonies, Earth's organisms developed predatory strategies of increasing sophistication. Some developed the ability to move toward prey, others to sense chemical signatures of potential food sources. Every adaptation was measured by its effectiveness in the consumption of others.
The display showed what looked like a microscopic hunter, a complex single-celled organism pursuing smaller prey with evident purpose and coordination.
Take this creature, for example,
Zira said, gesturing to the display.
On most worlds, organisms of this complexity work together, forming colonies that eventually specialize and differentiate into multicellular life. But this Earth organism is a solo predator, equipped with primitive sensory apparatus, feeding structures, and propulsion mechanisms, all designed to make it a more efficient killer.
Kronix's antennae twitched. Yet complex life did eventually emerge.
Indeed,
Zira nodded.
Which brings us to the next great phase of Earth's development.
The holographic display shifted again, now showing the emergence of plant life on land. Primitive green shoots rose from primordial shorelines, gradually evolving into ferns and early forests.
Approximately 500 million years ago, life began to colonize the land masses of Earth. When plant-based life emerged on land, the Council briefly hoped that Earth might finally be developing cooperation-based systems. After all, plants primarily derive energy from their sun rather than from consuming others. Perhaps this represented a shift away from the predatory paradigm.
Kronix leaned forward with interest as the display showed the development of increasingly complex plant ecosystems. Lush forests of towering ferns and primitive conifers spread across the ancient landmasses, creating the first terrestrial biomes.
But even here,
Zira continued,
competition remained the driving force. Plants competed ruthlessly for sunlight, developing taller structures specifically to shade out rivals. They produced chemicals to poison the soil around them, preventing other species from growing nearby. Some developed toxins to deter consumption, others sharp structures or sticky traps.
The display zoomed in on the molecular level, showing plant cells synthesizing compounds specifically designed to be toxic to other organisms.
These plants invested enormous resources into chemical warfare,
Zira explained.
They produced thousands of different toxins, alkaloids, terpenes, phenolics, all designed to kill or deter potential consumers. Some made their leaves difficult to digest by incorporating silica particles, essentially putting glass shards in their tissues. Others developed thorns, spines, or sticky resins to physically trap or injure herbivores.
The display panned across a prehistoric forest where plants could be seen competing for resources. Some vines actively strangled competing plants, while others released compounds into the soil that stunted the growth of neighbors.
The Council observed that even Earth's most seemingly passive life forms were engaged in a constant battle for survival. What looked superficially like a harmonious ecosystem was, on closer inspection, a battlefield where every organism fought for its own survival at the expense of others.
The display advanced to show the emergence of insect life and early land animals.
When animals moved onto land, they brought the obvious predatory paradigm with them. For a brief moment, the Council thought they had found evidence of cooperation when they discovered mitochondria, smaller organisms living within the cells of larger ones, apparently in harmony.
That sounds like symbiosis, Kronix observed.
We thought so too,
Zira said.
But deeper investigation revealed that even this was the result of an ancient predatory relationship. The larger cell had attempted to consume the smaller one, but instead of succeeding, they reached a stalemate that eventually became beneficial to both. Even Earth's rare examples of cooperation are born from predation.
The display showed a simulation of this ancient event, one cell engulfing another, but instead of digesting it, incorporating it into its structure.
This event, which Earth scientists would later call endosymbiosis, happened approximately 2 billion years ago. It was a pivotal moment in Earth's evolution, allowing for the development of more complex cells. But unlike the cooperative mergers seen on other worlds, this was essentially a predatory act that failed to conclude, resulting in an uneasy truce rather than true cooperation.
The display shifted again, now showing the massive forms of dinosaurs roaming ancient landscapes.
As life continued to evolve on land, the predatory arms race accelerated dramatically. Larger forms developed, with increasingly specialized adaptations for killing and consuming others. Sharp teeth, powerful jaws, toxic venoms, stealth capabilities, speed, strength, all continually refined through evolutionary pressure.
The display showed a Tyrannosaurus rex tearing into the flesh of a fallen herbivore, its massive jaws crushing bone with ease. Nearby, smaller predators waited for their opportunity to scavenge the remains.
These creatures dominated Earth for over 160 million local years,
Zirar explained.
The ancient observers documented thousands of species, each more perfectly adapted to predation than the last. The herbivores developed elaborate defenses, armored plates, horns, toxic secretions, while the carnivores evolved corresponding methods to overcome these defenses.
The display showed a panorama of the Mesozoic era, with various dinosaur species engaged in a constant cycle of hunting and being hunted.
What's particularly notable,
Zirar continued,
is that even the plant-eaters of Earth were destructive forces. Unlike the gentle grazers of most worlds, Earth's herbivores often destroyed the plants they fed upon, stripping entire areas bare before moving on. The plants, in turn, evolved ever more sophisticated defenses, tough fibers, toxins, rapid growth patterns, turning even the relationship between plant and herbivore into a form of warfare.
Kronix watched as the display showed a massive sauropod uprooting an entire tree to consume its foliage. These creatures are formidable.
Indeed,
Zirar agreed.
The council equivalent of that era again debated intervention. Some argued that while complex life had emerged against all expectations, surely such a competitive system could never produce true intelligence. The capacity for abstract thought, they reasoned, could only evolve in species that prioritized cooperation over competition.
Yet they still didn't intervene? Kronix asked.
No. There was too much scientific value in observing this evolutionary experiment. and there was significant doubt that any truly intelligent species could emerge from such an ecosystem. The general consensus was that Earth would produce increasingly efficient predators, but never the kind of cooperative social intelligence needed for civilization.
The display shifted to show various dinosaur species, from the massive predators like Tyrannosaurus and Spinosaurus to the armored herbivores like Triceratops and Ankylosaurus.
The range of diversity of these creatures was staggering,
Zira said.
Each niche in the ecosystem was filled with specialists, each locked in an evolutionary arms race with their predators or prey. Some developed pack-hunting behaviors, others elaborate courtship rituals or parental care. There were signs of increasing behavioral complexity, but always within the framework of predation and competition.
The holographic display showed the asteroid impact that ended the dinosaur era, the massive explosion and resulting dust cloud that encircled the planet.
Then came what Earth scientists would later call the KT extinction event. Approximately 66 million years ago, a massive asteroid impact wiped out the dominant life forms and reset the evolutionary board. In the aftermath, small, warm-blooded creatures began to thrive in the spaces left vacant by the great reptiles.
The display shifted to show the gradual emergence of mammalian life, small, furry creatures growing increasingly diverse and complex through the ages.
In the wake of this catastrophe, a different class of animals found their opportunity. Mammals had existed alongside the dinosaurs for millions of years, but had remained small and primarily nocturnal, avoiding direct competition with the dominant reptiles. With the dinosaurs gone, mammals rapidly diversified to fill the newly vacant ecological niches.
The display showed the rapid evolution of mammals, from small shrew-like creatures to an array of forms: early horses, primitive elephants, aquatic cetaceans, and aerial bats.
What made mammals different,
Zira explained,
was not a reduction in predatory behavior. They remained hunters and competitors, but rather a new dimension to their evolutionary strategy. Mammals invested heavily in neural development and behavioral plasticity. They could learn and adapt within a single lifetime, not just over generations.
The display showed early primates climbing through trees, their hands grasping branches with evident dexterity and purpose.
This brings us to perhaps the most controversial period in Earth's observation history,
Zira said, his voice growing more solemn.
As mammals evolved and diversified, something unexpected began to happen. These creatures, still predators at heart, began to show signs of social organization, more complex than anything seen previously on Earth.
The display showed early primates living in groups, sharing food, grooming one another, teaching skills to their young, and coordinating defenses against predators.
For the first time, the Council began to seriously consider the possibility that intelligent life might emerge from this predatory world, and this posed an unprecedented ethical dilemma.
Chronix's antennae bent forward in what Zira was beginning to recognize as intense interest. Why would that be a dilemma? Isn't the emergence of intelligence always celebrated?
Not when it emerges from the only known predatory evolutionary path,
Zira said grimly.
The Council of that era feared what might happen if a species with predation coded into its very evolutionary history developed technology in spaceflight. Would they bring their competitive, consumptive ethos to the stars? Or would they view other species as resources to be exploited rather than equals to cooperate with?
The display showed early hominids developing tools, controlling fire, hunting in coordinated groups. These creatures moved in groups, their eyes sharp with intelligence as they crafted stone blades and wooden spears.
Approximately 5 million years ago, a lineage of primates called hominids began to show signs of exceptional intelligence. They walked upright, freeing their hands for tool use. Their brains grew larger relative to their body size. They began to exhibit behaviors that suggested abstract thinking, burying their dead, creating art, developing increasingly complex forms of communication.
The display showed these early humans hunting in coordinated groups, bringing down prey much larger than themselves through strategy and cooperation.
But here was the irony that troubled the Council most,
Zira continued.
These creatures were developing cooperation as a more effective means of predation. They worked together not primarily to create, but to kill more efficiently. Their first tools were weapons. Their first uses of fire including cooking flesh to make it more digestible. Their social structures included hierarchy and dominance behaviors, characteristic of predatory species.
The display showed early human settlements with clear evidence of both cooperation within the group and conflict between different groups.
A decision was made. Earth was to be cleansed of its emerging proto-intelligent life before it could potentially threaten the cooperative galactic community. The species was deemed too dangerous to be allowed to develop further.
Kronix's antennae shot straight up. Extinction? Was this executed?
No,
Zira said.
History intervened. Just as preparations were being made, a crisis emerged that demanded all the Council's attention and resources.
The display shifted to show mechanical constructs spreading across multiple star systems, geometric forms with an ominous symmetry, consuming planetary resources and replicating endlessly.
A species from the adjacent galactic arm had created self-replicating machines intended to explore and report back. Due to a programming error, these machines instead began consuming planetary resources to build more of themselves. They spread rapidly, threatening all life in their path. The war against these machines became the Council's sole priority, and Earth was temporarily forgotten.
The display showed massive space battles, planets being shielded, and finally, the gradual containment of the machine threat. Council vessels of various designs coordinated in complex formations, deploying technologies that manipulated the very fabric of the universe to contain the mechanical plague.
The machine war lasted nearly 1,000,000 years,
Zira said solemnly.
Countless worlds were lost. Entire species were extinguished. The Council deployed technologies that hadn't been used since the dawn times. Some with consequences we're still dealing with today. It was a desperate struggle for the survival of all organic life in the galaxy.
The display showed the devastation in the aftermath. Dead worlds, shattered fleets, refugee populations scattered across distant star systems.
By the time the crisis ended, the old Council had been decimated. From its ashes, our current Council was formed, with new protocols and priorities. And when attention finally returned to Earth, those killer ape ancestors were already showing clear signs of patterned civilization. True intelligence had emerged while we were distracted.
The display showed early human cave paintings, primitive villages, and the first agricultural settlements. Humans could be seen planting crops, domesticating animals, and creating increasingly complex social structures.
In just the 1,000,000 years we were occupied with the machine threat, Earth's apex predator had made the transition from stone tools to agriculture. They had domesticated plants and animals, not through symbiosis as on other worlds, but through selective breeding for docility and productivity. They had developed spoken and written languages, not primarily to share wisdom, but to coordinate more effectively and to record the boundaries of territories. They had formed larger social groups, not based on mutual benefit, but on dominance hierarchies and the control of resources.
The display showed the rapid development of human civilization, the first cities, early empires, the spread of human populations across the planet. And why? Kronix asked slowly, his voice taking on a new, cautious tone. Didn't the new council destroy this emerging humanity? Zira's expression shifted subtly, his eyes narrowing as he leaned forward. The bioluminescent crest along his back shone once with a deep purple light, a sign of intense focus that Kronix likely couldn't interpret.
That,
Zira said,
is where things get truly interesting.
The holographic display shifted to show a panoramic view of human civilization spreading across the planet's surface. Cities rose and fell, borders shifted like living entities, and the tools of warfare evolved with frightening speed.
Unlike any species we've encountered, Zira continued, humans organized themselves into competing groups called nations. These weren't collaborative bioregions as we see on most worlds, but territorial entities defined by conflict. These borders were not determined by ecological boundaries or resource-sharing agreements, but by wars, conquests, and treaties following bloodshed.
The display showed ancient empires, Rome, Persia, China, the Mongol Khanate, expanding and contracting through cycles of conflict and conquest.
The Council was fascinated by this pattern, Zira explained. These humans didn't just compete with other species, they competed relentlessly with each other. Their weapons evolved from simple stone tools to bronze, then iron, then steel, each innovation driven by the need to kill more efficiently. They developed projectile weapons, siege engines, poisons, and battlefield tactics of increasing sophistication.
Kronix's antennae quivered. This seems wasteful. Surely such constant internal conflict would prevent technological advancement.
That's exactly what the Council thought,
Zira replied, his bioluminescent crest now shifting to a deep indigo shade.
But here's the paradox that made humans unique. Conflict accelerated their development rather than impeding it. Warfare drove innovation. Technologies developed for killing found peaceful applications. The need to defend against rivals pushed them to organize their societies with increasing complexity.
The display showed the rapid evolution of human technology alongside equally rapid developments in warfare, from spears to guns, from bows to artillery, from fortifications to bombs.
By the time they reached their Middle Ages, humans had already developed more types of weapons than most spacefaring species invent throughout their entire histories. Most Council species develop perhaps 2 or 3 methods of warfare before recognizing the futility of conflict and transitioning to cooperative models. Humans had catalogued hundreds, each designed for a specific type of killing.
Kronix watched with evident unease as the display cycled through images of medieval torture devices, battlefield executions, and the development of increasingly deadly armaments.
Another remarkable phase began approximately 5 centuries ago in their timeline,
Zira said, as the display shifted to show sailing ships crossing vast oceans.
Humans had developed in isolated groups across their world, each with their own cultures, technologies, and methods of warfare. Then they began what they call the Age of Exploration.
The display showed vessels landing on distant shores, encountering indigenous peoples, and establishing colonies.
Again, what might have been an opportunity for peaceful exchange became an exercise in conquest. The more technologically advanced groups subjugated others, extracted resources, and established global networks for commerce that were simultaneously networks for exploitation. And they didn't explore to learn, they explored to possess.
Kronix's antennae drooped slightly. This species seems defined by violence.
And yet,
Zira countered, his voice carrying a note of wonder.
In the midst of this conquest, they also exchanged ideas, technologies, and cultural innovations. Their conflicts brought them into contact, forcing them to comprehend worldviews different from their own. Their predatory nature drove them to explore every corner of their world far more rapidly than any cooperative species would have.
The display showed the rapid technological acceleration that followed the Age of Exploration. Steam engines, railways, factories, and increasingly complex social organizations.
The Council was certain on multiple occasions that human civilization was destined for self-destruction,
Zira said.
Their pattern was consistent. technological advancement outpacing their ethical development, leading to increasingly destructive conflicts.
The display shifted to show pandemic outbreaks, the Black Death, smallpox, cholera, influenza, sweeping through human populations.
Their handling of disease was particularly telling,
Zara noted.
When faced with pandemics, most species immediately implement collective responses to minimize suffering. Humans often did the opposite. They blamed outsiders, hoarded resources, and frequently used disease as yet another weapon of war.
The display showed scenes from various human wars, the Napoleonic conflicts, the World Wars, with increasingly devastating weapons deployed on ever larger scales.
The Council was absolutely certain that humans would annihilate themselves when they discovered atomic energy,
Zara said, as the display showed mushroom clouds arising over a small island.
They had weaponized the fundamental forces of their universe. Several Council species immediately called for intervention, arguing that humans had crossed a threshold that no predatory species should be allowed to survive.
Kronix leaned forward, antennae rigid with attention. Yet they survived this phase as well?
Not only survived, Zira said, but taught the Council something fundamental about game theory that we had never fully appreciated before.
The display shifted to show the Cold War era, missile silos, submarines carrying nuclear weapons, and diplomatic conferences between rival powers.
Humans developed a concept they called mutually assured destruction. Rather than immediately using their most powerful weapons as all our models predicted, they recognized that certain types of conflict had no winners. They created elaborate systems to prevent accidental war. They established communication channels between enemies. They developed theories of deterrence that relied not on trust, but on the rational self-interest of all participants.
Kronix's antennae curled inward. They did what most predators never do. They choose not to attack when they could have.
Exactly,
Zira said with evident excitement.
They were the first species in our records to fully formalize game theory, the mathematics of strategic interaction. While most cooperative species discover these principles eventually, they rarely need to apply them in existential contexts. Humans developed these theories specifically to prevent their own extinction.
The display showed early computer scientists, mathematicians, and military strategists working on game theoretical problems.
Even more remarkable,
Zira continued,
humans were the only species we've encountered who feared self-replicating machines before they had the technology to create them. They produced countless cultural narratives about technology turning against its creators. They anticipated the exact crisis that nearly destroyed the Council, despite having no direct experience with it.
The display showed clips from human science fiction, robots rebelling against creators, artificial intelligence systems turning hostile, nanomachines consuming the world.
The Council began to realize that human predatory evolution had given them a unique perspective. They constantly anticipated threats. They prepared for worst-case scenarios. They always assumed the worst from others. They developed contingency plans for events with minimal probabilities. In short, they thought like predators even when engaged in ostensibly peaceful activities.
Kronix's antennae suddenly shot upright. They sound too dangerous to be allowed further development. Surely the Council must have decided to eliminate them after all. Zira wasn't surprised by the response. It was typical of new species encountering the human paradox for the first time.
Many Council species agree with your assessment,
Zira acknowledged.
The elimination proposal comes up for vote approximately once every 50 years, but the utility argument has always prevailed.
Utility? Kronix asked, antennae twitching.
Humans think differently than any other species we've encountered,
Zira explained.
They anticipate problems we would never consider. They develop solutions based on competition rather than cooperation, often yielding insights we would otherwise miss. and they possess a cultural creativity driven by their constant internal conflicts that produces art, music, and literature we would never think of.
The display showed human artistic achievements, architecture, paintings, musical performances, and literary works.
The final decision, Zira continued, has been to wait and observe. If humans develop faster than light travel and join the galactic community, we will finally discover whether a predatory species can transition to true cooperation. The prevailing theory is that encountering a galaxy full of cooperative species might finally allow humans to overcome their predatory tendencies.
The display showed conceptual designs for human interstellar vessels, some peaceful in design, others distinctly militaristic.
There's also the deterrence argument,
Zira added.
The humans need to understand that while they may be exceptional predators on their world, the combined resources of the Council would overwhelm them should they attempt conquest. Meeting a unified galactic community might be the final pressure needed to complete their transition from competition to cooperation.
Kronix's antennae curved inward, a gesture Zira had come to recognize as skepticism. And you, personally? What do you think of these humans? Zira's bioluminescent crest shifted to a warm amber glow that reflected his genuine enthusiasm.
I find them fascinating. They create not just to communicate or record, but to excel, to surpass what came before. I can see a future where they learn from us, just as we have learned from them.
The display showed human peace movements, humanitarian efforts, scientific collaborations, and cultural exchanges.
I hope to meet them within my lifetime,
Zira concluded, his wide mouth forming what his species would recognize as a smile of anticipation.
To speak with a creature shaped by such a different evolutionary path. What scientist could resist such an opportunity?
The display shifted one final time to show Earth as viewed from space, a blue marble suspended in darkness, teeming with life both beautiful and terrible, the only world in the galaxy where predation, rather than cooperation, had birthed a thinking species.
Earth doesn't raise prey,
Zira repeated his earlier statement, but now with a tone of wonder rather than warning.
It breeds predators. And in that unique crucible, something unexpected emerged. Predators who learned to question their own nature. Whether they can transcend it remains to be seen, and whether predation itself is a bad thing is not clear either. But I, for one, am eager to witness their first steps into the wider galaxy.
Kronix sat in silence, his antennae slowly shifting through positions that Zira couldn't interpret. Finally, he spoke. Thank you for this initiation, Diplomat Zira. I believe I understand now why this ritual exists. The humans force us to question our most fundamental assumptions about intelligence itself. Zira nodded, pleased that the new ambassador had grasped the deeper purpose of the Earth observation ritual.
Indeed.
Together, they turned to gaze through the viewport at the blue planet below, where the apex predators of Earth continued their uncertain journey toward the stars.